That is, of course, the first prelude in the Well-Tempered Clavier, the one in C major that probably most of you have played if you ever took piano lessons as children. Here is a facsimile of Bach's manuscript. This is in his own hand. It's one of the few surviving copies of this work. The whole Well-Tempered Clavier was amazing. It was conceived at a time when Bach was locked up for a month in jail. We'll get to why that was the case. But there's an interesting parallel to how I conceived this project in early 2020 when we were all locked up in quarantine. I started playing through the Well-Tempered Clavier. I played Bach and Chopin. I was working on Chopin for Ali, but doing Bach at the same time. And it was deeply satisfying and meaningful work. And it is a bottomless well. It is a sea. You can never get to the bottom of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And so hence, here we are, almost 3 years later, and I'm going to take you, I hope, on a guided tour of the Well-Tempered Clavier, so you'll come away with a little bit more understanding of its background and why it means so much to musicians and what it is that's so hypnotic about it, so magnetic. If you have David Gordon's little book, this is absolutely delightful, the Little Bach book. I highly recommend it as an enrichment to this course. He translates the title page. Here's the title page. That's Bach's own strange calligraphy. And no one knows what this means, these squiggles across the top. There's 12 of them. And so we're wondering, is it some kind of a secret cipher for the tuning? Because the whole point of the Well-Tempered Clavier was if you tuned your instrument in this new way of, equal temperament, you could play pieces in remote keys that had 6 and 7 sharps and 6 and 7 flats. Whereas if you played in the old mean tone tuning, you could only go as far as 3 or 4 flats or sharps, and then it sounded horrendous. So he was advocating for this system of tuning. And it says on the very front cover, the Well-Tempered Clavier, or Preludes and Fugues through all the tones and semitones. That means writing pieces on every degree of the scale, both in a major key and a minor key, so they come in pairs, for the profit and use of studious musical youth, and also for those who are already accomplished in this skill, for their diversion, composed and made by Johann Sebastian Bach, currently Royal Anhalt-Köthen-Kapellmeister and director of the chamber musicians in the year 1722. This is something of the Bible of musicians. It has been considered such ever since it was released onto the world in hand-copied versions, a couple of which survived. There's one that's all in his hand and one that's in various hands, Anna Magdalena, some of his and some of other copyists. They're both in museums in Berlin. How this circulated was a testament to the reverence musicians have for it. And that is how Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven became acquainted with it, and they were all taught as children. They were taught the Well-Tempered Clavier, also Chopin, from the age of 9 or 10 or 11, also Franz Liszt. This was the basic foundation of teaching, was the Well-Tempered Clavier. More about them later. Let's look at a few of the quotations. I have some brilliant quotations by musicians just to set the stage for the stature of this work. There's one by Goethe that says, music is liquid architecture. Architecture is frozen music. I love that. That is not about the Well-Tempered Clavier, but it might as well suit Bach perfectly. Bach means brook, and his manuscripts flow. There's a liquid flow to his calligraphy. There he is himself, the 1748 famous portrait with what is in his hand is a musical puzzle. It's a triplex canon, and it took people years to figure it out. It's a puzzle, and we'll talk about that later as well. And if you're interested in this portrait, it's amazing. It went from Europe, it disappeared. First it was in CPE Bach's hands. Then it disappeared. And then before World War II, in the 1930s, a man came from Eastern Europe to John Eliot Gardner's parents' house in Dorset with this picture in a knapsack and said, "Could you keep this for me? I'm afraid if it stays in Europe, it will be destroyed." And they had it during the war years. Then in 1952, the owner sold it to a man in Princeton, New Jersey, who was a Bach scholar. He recently died, only in 2015, and now the portrait has been returned to the Bach archive in Leipzig. So it's amazing. Let's keep going. So you have to go to Leipzig now to see the original Mozart. Now, here is music from which a man can learn something. And Mozart became very obsessed with counterpoint late in his career. Next one is Beethoven. I love this. Nicht Bach, sondern mehr sollte heißen, wegen seines unerschöpflichen Reichtums an Tonkombination und Harmonium. Not Bruch, but C. Next one. Study Bach. There you will find everything. Even Brahms, whose intermezzos are very contrapuntal, and the German Requiem. Next one. The Most Stupendous Miracle in All Music, yes, by Richard, which is something because he probably had the most stupendous ego in all music. And next, Casals, yes, who began every day by playing a pair of Bach preludes and fugues to start his day. He said that was just, it was like an act of devotion, and it started the day out right. And it was a source of unending pleasure for him. Next one, William F. Buckley. Bach and Not in Heaven, I'm not going. Okay, and the monogram. Now, just to inside his head a little bit, this monogram was something he devised in the 1730s when he thought he might be getting a royal appointment title from the court in Dresden. The court in Dresden was Catholic, and he was unhappy in his job in Leipzig, and he was kind of putting feelers out. Maybe would they need a Kapellmeister in Dresden, for which he sent 2 movements of the B minor Mass. This is the Catholic court of Dresden, not Lutheran. And he, in anticipation perhaps of this new royal title, he created this monogram with the crown for the Royal Dresden Court and his initials. Now look what he's done. He took his 3 initials, JSB, and then superimposed the mirror image of it to create this beautiful design of a monogram. That's kind of how his mind works in music as well. He takes patterns and he turns them upside down and backwards and mirror images, and he stretches them and he shrinks them and combines them in the most amazing, amazing ways. Okay, next one. Martin Luther. Okay, as a child in Eisenach, he was born into a very musical family and sent to a boys' Latin school, which was coincidentally the same Latin school that Martin Luther had attended as a child in the same town 200 years earlier. So every day in school, he was singing the Lutheran hymns, many of them composed by Martin Luther. They also took popular tunes. He's the one who said, why should the devil have all the good tunes? Take popular songs and put new words to them, devotional words, so that the word in church would come alive. Martin Luther was strongly, strongly in favor of lively, meaningful expression of music in church. His other colleagues, the Calvinists and the Pietists, were not. They did not want instrumental music. They didn't want fancy figured music. They definitely did not want any women in church, and sometimes no singing but a single line singing, or no music at all. These were the very severe Protestants of the Protestant Reformation. So Luther is the advocate of music, good music in church, and Bach harmonized a lot of these chorales in stunning ways. Let me play for you his harmonization of Ein feste Burg. This is a mighty fortress, is our God. And in the Bach chorales, he's harmonized it 6 times. So here's just one of them. you notice there were some rhythmic changes, and the harmony is very surprising. It's not just the standard, not standard primary triads. He goes far, far away. Let's look at the next slide. It's a Christmas chorale. Vom Himmel hoch. Yeah, von Himmel hoch, da komm ich her. From heaven on high, he comes to us. He comes down to earth. And he takes that simple tune, the chorale, and makes the most beautiful fugal chorale prelude out of it for the organ. I'll just play a bit of it so you can see. There's all these intertwining voices of counterpoint. Counterpoint means melody against melody. So the basic tune you can read from this is simple. You probably all recognize that. Okay, now here's a bit of the chorale prelude of Bach. First he states the tune. It goes on and on and on, but it's a magnificent contrapuntal weaving of that chorale tune. There's the St. George's Church and School, just the church in Eisenach. This is where Bach was baptized, christened 2 days after he was born, and where Martin Luther preached in 1521, right after he had done his famous 95 Theses and nailed it to the church wall and became an outlaw in Europe, and had to hide then for a year in the Wartburg castle just above Eisenach. And while Martin Luther was up there, he was imprisoned for 10 months and couldn't leave. So instead of contemplating, like Bach did the Well-Tempered Clavier in a month, Luther translated the New Testament from Greek to German, and this became the basis of modern German language and the whole Lutheran movement. Okay, and you can visit these places now. The baptismal font there, they put it right in the middle of the church, right in front of the altar. That is the very font that was used for Bach. Okay, next slide is the school, the Latin school for boys. Both Luther and Bach attended this school. And there's a wonderful new book about Bach I could highly recommend. John Eliot Gardner's Bach, Music in the Castle of Heaven. And he's done far more original research about these years. And what we find is that the school was a pretty dreadful environment. It was overcrowded. It was run by bullies of boys. There was terrible hazing and abuse from both certain of the teachers and from older boys that bullied the younger boys. It was freezing, it was filthy, it was full of rats and mice. For a joke, some of the older boys took a mouse, burned it with a candle, and put it on the seat of the teacher. There was some reprimanding about this. They threw bricks through the windows. It was a frightening place, and especially for Bach, because he was very smart. He could read and write when they put him in school, so he was advanced to grade, which meant he was the smallest and the youngest in his class. So there is conjecture that he was probably bullied and miserable while he was in this school. Okay, then when he was 10 years old, his mother died when he was 9, very suddenly, and then 9 months later, his father died, and they were buried in unmarked graves in this Friedhof, the old church cemetery by the city walls. And Bach would have had to sing in the boys' choir for the interment of those ceremonies. So you have something about the childhood, the Lutheran background, the very strong Lutheran background, and the origins of this, how he was in jail. I want to play for you a little bit more before we talk and tell the whole story of how he got to be put in jail. This well-tempered clavier, it says clavier, the well-tempered keyboard. Now for Bach, he didn't specify. The 3 keyboards available to him were the pipe organ, the harpsichord, and the clavichord. And none of these pieces are specifically designated. Other pieces that he wrote were the Italian concerto and the Goldberg variations are specifically for harpsichord. And of course, the organ pieces we know for organ. There is one piece in the well-tempered clavier that has a low A pedal point that is impossible to hold while you play 4 voices up higher. So that clearly looks like an organ piece. And some of the brilliant ones, the fast, fluttery figuration ones, look like harpsichord music to me, that rattling, brilliant, fast 16th note texture. And then there are other ones that are arias that are deeply thoughtful and mournful, and a clavichord, which has a degree of touch sensitivity, would be the perfect instrument for those. You need to also have some working vocabulary about fugal techniques. What is a fugue? Okay, counterpoint is melody against melody, not harmonic music, like using chords as a base, or that's a single melody against a simple chordal accompaniment. In a fugue, you have a short theme, which always appears just all by itself at the beginning. And then it's joined, it's copied, or it's imitated in another voice. They can be in 2, 3, 4, 5 voices and more. And in the well-tempered clavier, most of the fugues are in 3 and 4 voices. There's 2 that are in 5. And those are devils to play, I'll tell you, because you can't hear clearly the voices. It's more like a choral conception of something. It should be a Kyrie in a mass. It should be a motet. And the more you play them, the more your ear and your mind are able to differentiate the voices. But just hearing it the first time, I can't see how anybody could understand what's going on. So these pieces are not meant for performance. They are meant, as he said on the title page, for the diversion, for the study, for the pleasure of people who want to study the keyboard. Ralph Kirkpatrick, the great harpsichordist, has a wonderful little book that's very helpful to performers for interpreting the well-tempered clavier. He also recorded everything about 3 times on clavichord and harpsichord, and he wanted to do the pipe organ, but then he never did. He ran out of time, and then his eyes went bad, so he wasn't able to do that. But I listened to this one. So this is on clavichord, and this was Bach's favorite instrument, was the clavichord, because it's an intimate, small, intimate, private instrument. You could just play it for 2 people in a room. No one would hear you because it's so quiet, but it does have nuances possible, touch sensitivity. Anyway, so back to Ralph, who's brilliant on this subject. He says these pieces were never intended for performance, and there is no logical order to the progression. It's merely a sequence of going, through the keys: C major, C minor, C sharp major, C sharp minor, D major, D minor, going logically through every step, not a dramatic sequence like the Goldberg variations. The Goldberg variations are an amazing dramatic sequence of an arc that's meant to be heard all together all in one time. These is like a sketchbook of things that are just put together, and you can jump around. There's no need to play, there's no sense of a performance structure that you are meant to start at the beginning and go to the end. And he's very funny on that. He says a total performance of the well-tempered clavier is a monstrous piece of pedantry, if bearable at all. But if it succeeds, it carries an impact that a selection of individual preludes and fugues will never have as a whole, no matter how effectively individually. It has some of the characteristics at once revealing and disquieting, rich and provocative, rewarding and overwhelming, of a condensation into a single day of an eternity of experience. He's a poet. That is so beautiful. And he's absolutely right. People do perform the well-tempered clavier. Jeremy Denk just did it at Sunset Center a few weeks ago, and fabulously. I was not able to attend, but I hear it was a beautiful, beautiful concert. What is fun to do is to study these pieces and see, what is Bach doing? What kind of game is he playing with the counterpoint? So let me talk to you just a little bit about the C major fugue, the one that follows the... Okay, this is the companion piece to that. It's not simple. Of course, it's like this. It's layers and layers of things, put and then upside down. The subject of the fugue has 14 notes. Why is that number important? I'll tell you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay. Bach not only can make counterpoint and write 4 voices, it's like the most fancy, difficult game of cat's cradle, weaving these voices together with subject and counter subject, sometimes 2 subjects. He's also playing games with numerology. If you assign numbers to the letter of the alphabet, where A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, etc. If you take the numbers for Bach, B, A, C, and H in the German musical language is B natural, H, so that comes out as an 8. They add up to 14. So it's like he's got his fingerprints on this theme, and things happen in the 14th bar of the piece. There's a stretto. It comes back to the key of C major, and there's a stretto. That means where the entries of the theme interrupt each other before one is finished, another one starts, and it all works out. Michelle inadvertently did a Bach numerology thing when she made the catalog. She didn't know she was doing this, but here's our catalog with my course description, J.S. Bach. It's on page 14. I love that when I saw that. That's woo-woo, something very strange going on there. Okay, so back to the numerology. This theme with the 14 notes. Also, here, let's go back to the prelude for a second. Here's the harmonic outline of the prelude. And preludes were mostly just about broken chords. And the whole first few in here, they're all different variations on a broken chord. So here's the harmonic bare bones of it, okay? There's no melody. There's just this harmonic progression. Stop there. I'm just playing now the tops. Okay, now look at the fugue theme. He's taken the harmonic outline of the prelude and used it as a basis for constructing this fugue theme. Okay, so you're going to have entries. Entries means when the subject comes, and then they'll be accompanied by a counter subject, an accompanying figure, which is just those 4 little groups of rolling 16th notes, which is an inversion speeded up of. the 4 rising steps? We have the 4 falling steps now, but speed it up, okay? So that's one game he's playing. Yes, there was another game. Let me play it for you. It's 4 voices. It's quite splendid, and the C major is a key of strong confidence. And he's starting out this series, and he's put his name, the 14 notes, right on the theme. It's fabulous. It's in C major, but of course he visits other keys. He goes into the relative minor, and he goes into the dominant, and he flirts with passing through other keys. So there's constant light and shade, and light and shade, and it's a journey. And besides, there's this onion of structure which you would never get to the bottom of, and the harmonic richness of it is stunning. Speaking of harmonic richness, let me tell you a story about how he got into trouble. This is before he goes sent to jail. He was always in trouble with his employers. He was always dissatisfied. Of course, he was never getting enough money, and half of his pay would be in firewood or beer or barley. And then they would expect him, there would be hidden responsibilities in the job, like, oh yeah, and besides playing for 6 church services, we want you to control the boys choir and train them and write music, a new piece every Sunday for church, and maybe conduct this instrumental ensemble of students. So he was constantly pushing, because the level was terrible, and he didn't have the resources, and they would kind of ask him to do extra things. And the people who were asking him to do the extra things were not musically literate. So he would get fed up and furious. He had a fight with one of these student instrumentalists. This is the famous bassoonist that he called a zippelfagotist. And after this fight, in which he did not come out ahead, that he was not supported by the church council or the town council, and this bully, who was an older guy, was an incompetent, seemed to get the better hand of him. And I'll tell much more about this story later. But a few weeks after all this was unresolved, and it was clear that he was not going to come out ahead, he gave 4 weeks notice, and he said, I'm going to go up to Lübeck and hear Buxtehude. He's doing a series of evening concerts up there, and I need to enrich, you know, and learn what he has to learn. So he deputized a cousin of his to cover his church job. He gave the 4 weeks notice, and then he left for 4 months. And when he came back, they said, "Why were you gone for 4 months?" I said, "Well, I had to learn what I needed to learn." You know, he was very proud. He was very proud, and being in Lubeck, listening to Buxtehude, who was old at that time and was one of the most revered organists and composers in northern Germany, he learned a few tricks. And one of Buxtehude's tricks was called the passaggio chorale, where you take the notes, the phrases of a chorale, and insert little virtuoso passages in between the phrases. And the town council did not like this. They criticized him and said, people are getting lost, and your harmonizations are full of wild, strange notes that are very disturbing. Please just stop it and make things simple. So, of course, he didn't. He went beyond, and he made it more and more and more fancy. So he took this chorale, Allein Gott, and he embellished it. And it's one of the most stunning things. And this was a direct result of listening to the music of Buxtehude that he learned while he was away. Okay, here's the simple chorale. On like that. It's basically, you know, triadic harmonies, primary triads in G. Okay, so after hanging out with Buxtehude, this is what he wrote, and this is what the town council and the church elders and the minister were complaining about, introducing these strange tones and wild things, and the congregation is getting lost, and please stop that. You can see him just say, "See how you like that." You know, he's totally not cooperating with them, not at all. Okay, so maybe we should do another prelude. 11 of these preludes appeared in the notebook for Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, who was his oldest son, his second child, after he married Maria Barbara. There's a lovely notebook that you can still buy, the notebook of Wilhelm Friedemann Bach. And it's got these 11 early versions of the preludes. Sometimes they're extended, and some of them are complete, but most of them there are changes and there's extensions. There's also lots of little preludes and all of the 2 and 3 part inventions and some pieces by other composers. Now, Wilhelm Friedemann was 9 years old. 9. when he was given this. The 2 and 3 part inventions, dance movements, and the early 9 or 11 of these preludes. I started lessons when I was 9. With my teacher gave me teaching little fingers to play, and then I got my first Bach book, and my first Bach book, looked like this. It was just great big notes, 2 voices, the minuets in G, that kind of thing. That's where most of us start. But this poor 9-year-old boy was already at the level of a high school student, a good high school student. So here is the C minor prelude. And this one it's a companion piece to the broken chords of the C major prelude. Okay, it's just broken chords, but then it's interrupted. There's a presto. The version for Wilhelm Friedemann Bach just stops just before this presto and has a final cadence. So Bach added the presto where the 2 hands race together, and then it stops with an adagio. This is very improvisatory. You get a feeling for what Bach's organ improvisations must have been like, which he was most famous for. He's improvising at the organ, not his compositions. During his lifetime, he was more famous as an organist. So listen to this and get a feeling for how he manipulates the broken chords, and then the dramatic change in tempo and texture where he introduces these changes as one of his improvisations. It's magnificent in the energy and in the pride, his confidence. This is me. I'm J.S. Bach. Take it or leave it. The fugue for this one has an amazing story with it. I mean, this fugue is often used for analysis for music theory classes because it's a great example. But the story is even better about this fugue. I'll give you a tiny bit of. I'll tell you the story first. The story is fantastic. Okay. When Liszt was 11 years old, he was taken by his teacher, Czerny, who had been a student of Beethoven. They were in Vienna. Liszt was already concertizing at this age. And Czerny wants to show off his prize student, who has come from Hungary, already very accomplished, and Czerny's kind of polishing him. This 11-year-old, he's already very well known. Czerny takes him to Beethoven, who's old and grumpy and he can't stand child prodigies, and is, mostly deaf and just not socially disposed to anything like this kind of a stunt. So to test the child, he asks him to play a Bach fugue. And Liszt, of course, because this is what people did, Liszt knew the Well-Tempered Clavier. He knew all of it. It was memorized. So he played him this C minor fugue. And Beethoven says, not bad. Now, can you transpose it? Transpose it? And Liszt did. He said, yeah, sure. And he transposed it. And that broke the ice and said, oh, you're going to go far. You're going to have a wonderful career. You're going to make people so happy. And he gave him a big hug. And this was a signature story in Liszt's life that he told over and over and over again, that he was very, very proud. So here's the C minor fugue. It's only 3 voices, so it's not the hardest. It's a very short theme that falls into repetitive sections, so it's easy to manipulate. Okay, so here's the theme. Okay, so you hear the 3 repetitions arriving at a different note each time, so kind of a mordant, that figure. To A flat, to G, down to E flat. Okay. And then the counter subject, which will accompany this jumpy, chopped up into 3 sections fugue theme, is scales, running up and down scales. So you'll hear the theme come in each voice, first in the bottom and then the top and then the middle, and then he'll start playing with it. And there's it's wonderfully playful. The lovely major resolution at the end. Okay. My plan was that for each session, I would do 3 keys. So C today, C, C sharp, and D. That means 6 pairs. A prelude and fugue in major and minor on each one. Okay. So we'll see if I can do it. All right. This is my own personal marathon to set. D minor. We're still doing broken chords for the prelude. There's not much of a melody. It's all about harmonic progression and then keyboard patterns, rising arpeggios. And it has kind of a relentless heartbeat that starts, for which to me gives me a kind of feeling of anxiety. This is someone, and it's in D minor. It's a serious key. So there's something working through something very negative here. And it again, it ends in the major and then goes straight into a three-voice fugue, which again has that Bach characteristic of being challenging, saying, "Oh yeah, well I'm not going to do that." You know, it's this an attitude of resistance and of rebellion that in his positions and jobs, both in courts and in churches, he was an employee and he was under the thumb of boards of people who were far below him. And that was a problem for him because he felt he has a God-given gift of music. And his mission is to make a beautiful and well-ordered church music to the glory of God and the refreshment of the human spirit. And anybody who gets in his way is getting in the way of God's mission for him. He was very devout, but he was also very proud. So here's D minor prelude, wonderful rolling broken chords and very chromatic harmony. And then it goes straight into, I'll go straight into the fugue. I think they're supposed to go, you know, do them back to back. A prelude goes right into a fugue. And again, with this spirit of defiance. it's so interesting to me that so many of these end on a major chord instead of minor. I mean, it's minor all the way through, and there's this combative mood, and then it resolves so sweetly. And for that kind of for me ties in with his refreshment of the human spirit idea. Also, this one is great because the inversions of the theme are so prominent. I forgot to mention that, but maybe it'll just show you. So the main theme is, and then it comes in the inversion. And he plays and he combines those two things, the right side up and upside down, and also with that counter subject all the way through. So again, weaving these three changing voices in a beautiful, beautiful braided texture. Let's look at some pictures. I think you need a break from me playing this. And I have some lovely pictures of Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, portraits, and some of his manuscripts. This is interesting. This is the oldest son. Carl Philipp Emanuel was the next oldest son. And he was very successful as a composer and an organist. He married and had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. The sons died, and the one daughter, Frederica Sophia, had children, you won't believe this, who emigrated to America, to Oklahoma. And in their possession were manuscripts of Bach. Wilhelm Friedemann wasn't a very good caretaker of his dad's manuscripts. He sold some when he had debts while he was in, where was he, Dresden or Halle? He sold some, and then some were inherited by his family. So ended up in Oklahoma. How did that happen? And they were inadvertently destroyed by these people who had no clue what they had in their possession. And the last one died in the 1890s something. Now, just by sheerest weird coincidence, this is like Michelle putting my thing on page 14. My paternal grandfather, my dad's father, was from a family of Irish immigrants who went to Oklahoma and then Texas, and his name was Johann Sebastian Coffey. So something's going on there. I don't know quite what it is, but there's a weird connection. Okay, so here's Wilhelm Friedemann, the poor, who as a 9-year-old was given this huge notebook. Okay, next we're going to look at some of his manuscript in Bach's handwriting, and there he's showing the ornaments. Okay, this is what the symbol for the ornament is, and here's how you realize it. And here's the names of the notes and your scales. You have to learn your scales. And the weirdest thing was Bach was the one who really revolutionized keyboard playing with the use of the thumb. And now it's inconceivable to us. How could you play anything without your thumb? Well, it was because the music was much simpler in those early days. So Bach greatly expanded the level of difficulty and the technique. But look at that fingering. That's the old Renaissance, maybe medieval fingering, going 3, 4, 3, 4, 4. It's unbelievable. So you have to go, and you pass a long finger over a shorter finger. And this was standard practice for a long time. Okay, next one. There's the shorthand manuscript of the C major. And notice it's not in treble clef. Bach will use C clefs. And the reason for that mostly was to save space on the paper. So you want to keep all the notes on the staff and not use a lot of ledger line notes where they would drift up into the space above and below. So if he uses C clef, he could just keep it all close and tight. And then he got tired. He said, that's the figuration, figure it out. And then here's the chord progression, right? Just keep going. You know what to do, kind of thing. Okay, next one. Oh, and there's a lovely F major prelude. This is one of the ones that was mostly intact, given to this 9-year-old, which we'll do next week. But look at the beautiful calligraphy and the sense of waves. It's so different when you look at it. When you look at it printed on the page, everything is so stiff. Here's that same music in a printed edition, the Kroll edition. And you have a completely different feeling than if you're looking at that manuscript with this fluid, soft waves. It's such a different impression. There's the original title page of the Well-Tempered Clavier with no designation for harpsichord, organ, or clavichord, and the admonition that this is for study and for the pleasure of both students and those who are more accomplished. Let's do D major now. D major is one of these wonderful, it's not quite a broken chord pattern. I mean, there's a chord pattern in there in that it's very simple harmonic rhythm. There's only one chord per measure when it starts out. So it's a so basically the harmonic rhythm's quite slow, but it's filled in with this hamster wheel figure in the right hand that just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning. Okay. And then, you know, it modulates, it goes to the subdominant, it goes to the dominant. The left hand is kind of like a string bass, say in a jazz group. Just keeps it's just keeping the beat, okay, like a good bass player. And the right hand is trapped in this hamster wheel, going around and around and around. Near the end, suddenly the left hand joins in. There's 4 measures, hands together, of doing the wild pattern together. Then it stops. There's an adagio, full stop, stop, adagio, big flourish, and a cadence, and we're done. So the whole thing comes off as very playful and very, very light. Okay, let's try this one, see if we can do, okay. Now, you know, Chopin played these every day. He taught them to all his students. And it was the only book he took to Mallorca in 1838 when he went down there with George Sand on a disastrous winter trip to Mallorca, and they nearly froze to death. He was finishing his preludes, and the only printed piece of music he took with him was the Well-Tempered Clavier. I think I found a new connection. Like, for years, people have been saying, oh yeah, Chopin preludes, those are short, beautiful miniatures as an homage to Bach. There are 24 of them, and there's one in each key, okay? And the first one, the C major, and then he takes a different plan. He doesn't go like C, C sharp, D, D sharp. He goes C major, and then the relative minor, A minor, and then G major and E minor. Okay, so the C major one is C major broken chords, and it's clearly an homage to this. I'll play it for you. It takes about 40 seconds to play, so I'll play this for you. ends it on exactly the same chord as the Bach C major prelude. Now, my discovery was, I think this prelude, that thing, I think he took it and turned it upside down and took the figure, the running figure that emphasizes, okay, it's do, re, mi, right? With bouncing. Going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on those three notes. And then the fugue that follows is a French overture, with dotted rhythms. This is really unusual that the fugue is a French overture. There's no counter subject. There's only this one idea. And it's very related to that same thing, running back and forth from do, re, mi, back and forth. All right, so let me play the fugue and then I'll show you the Chopin connection. Simple fugue and both themes running back and forth on do, re, mi, dotted rhythms, okay, and the perpetual motion of them. Okay, now, Chopin. Chopin is playing these every day since he was 10 years old. And he says, that's an interesting idea. Something very short, only 33 measures, with a figure that runs back. His is in G, so you have to hear over and over and over and over, do, re, mi, and then a dotted rhythm in the right hand in the simplest skeletal bare bones of a melody. stunningly derived from the Bach. I can hear that. I hope you can hear some of that. I don't think I'm imagining it quite. Okay, we got two biggies left. We have C sharp major and C sharp minor, the two biggest ones. Let me try C sharp minor first, okay? This one, this is one of the really serious ones, and oddly enough, the prelude appears in the Wilhelm Friedemann notebook. The fugue is one of two five-voiced fugues in the Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1, and it has three subjects. So a lot of numerology is coming into play here. 3 is the number of the Trinity. The note, the theme of the fugue is this chromatic pattern that makes the sign of the cross. It's 5 notes. 5 notes is the number of the wounds of Christ. And Bach uses this cross figure. The first note and the last note are the same, and then it goes down and up and back, right? So it draws a cross. Goes down, up, and then back where you started. Okay, so down and back. It's in 3 sections. It's got 3 fugues, 3 subjects that are then all combined, and each of the subjects is derived from the opening pattern. So as a symbol of the Trinity, which is the 3 in 1, it's pretty stunning. It's a beast to play because it's a motet. It's a motet, and you have to hear in your head something like a 5-part choir. The prelude is far easier and very, very beautiful and deeply tragic. Let's try. That one is monumental. You'll have to, it takes more than one hearing. So I hope maybe you'll go back and give it a second chance and try to decipher what's going on there with those three themes and the way he combines them and comes back to them. Okay, we just have time for the last one. The C sharp major is wonderful. And some writers think it shows the influence of Spanish music, specifically Scarlatti. There are some guitar patterns. There's something called batterie, which you, in the guitar, when you strum, you go down, up, down, up, down, up. So you get the pattern. And you know, the strings going down, up in reverse order like that. So he uses that, and also some alternating hands, is kind of virtuosic alternating hands, very playful, very dance-like this. Okay, so here's some C sharp major, and an early version of this was in Wilhelm Friedemann Bach's book as well. This poor 9-year-old, he must have been under some heavy stress. The fugue is in C sharp major. That means a gazillion sharps and double sharps. And so the editors of my book have very conveniently written it out in the back in D flat major, 5 flats, which I've struggled with the C sharp for years, but it's still not reliable. So I'm going to play it in D flat. You won't be able to tell the difference, but to me, it makes a world of difference. It's a 3-voiced fugue. It's very joyful. It's exuberantly joyful. The theme is short and full of leaps. And always a leap of 7th at the end. There's some wonderful dissonances, 7th and 9th, that he puts on downbeats here. So mostly in 3 voices, occasionally in 2 for a thinner texture. something like that. But pure joy. This one just exploding with pure joy. Okay, thank you. I think we made it. We made it through the first 6 pairs. Next week we'll do E flat, E and F, and I'll come back with more stories. If you read David's book, you'll find out what it's like trying to write music of this complexity with a feather and by candlelight. So I strongly recommend reading David's little book.